How do I effectively manage my time to get straight A's? Now, if you're someone who struggles with organizing your study time and sticking with it because you always end up procrastinating, scrolling through social media, or you suddenly get the urge to clean up your whole room, then this video is for you. Because let me tell you, organization, contrary to what a lot of people make you believe, is actually not that intimidating. It's actually very helpful and easy. Trust me, that is coming from someone whose main sign in her birth chart is Sagittarius. The sign that loves freedom and is very spontaneous, aka the worst person ever to organize their life, and yet I am still here making this video for you. So if I can do it, then surely you can do it too, unless you only have Sagittarius placements. Then I wouldn't know why you clicked on this video in the first place. But whatever, in this video I'm going to show you how I organize my studying time and how I design my study plan, because I always get a lot of questions about that. I will be talking on how I do this throughout the semester and during exam season. Planning is really half the work. Now, before we get into my actual techniques, I think I should mention that I'm a student here in Germany, and therefore my university system is different than a lot of other countries. I only have one exam for each module, and this determines my whole grade for the class. So I don't have any assignments, group projects, or homeworks, or anything else. Therefore, my study plan is kind of aligned to make me study effectively for my final exam. Obviously, you can adjust that, but I still think that this video might be helpful to you because we all have finals, okay? My basic principle when organizing is to break bigger tasks into smaller tasks. I kind of have three dimensions to that. First are weekly goals, which is like the broader dimension. Then I also have the daily to-dos, and then the hourly time blockage system that I sometimes use. Out of all these three, I only use the daily to-dos often. I rarely do use the weekly goals and the hourly time blocks, but I will be going over them very quickly as well. Now, why do I think it's effective to break down bigger tasks into smaller tasks? I'm sure you guys probably heard a lot about this technique. It is there to help you make the task as easily accessible and as less intimidating as possible. I often procrastinate a lot because I'm just too scared to start. Breaking down the task makes it a lot more easier to start, right? It's less intimidating. Also, it gets you into the flow easier, but it also makes you stay in your flow for a longer time because you always know what the next step will be, and therefore it helps a lot to stay focused. And also, I feel very accomplished whenever I can just cross off something that I needed to do for that day. So by breaking down things into smaller tasks, I have more things to cross off, and it gives me a little bit of an ego boost, you know? Okay, just boost yourself a little bit. It's all about the mindset at the end of the day. Okay, as I already mentioned, my planning process is split into two parts. Let's start with the throughout the semester plan first, obviously. So during the semester, every week I have a designated day or sometimes 2 days for specific subjects to study for that. I don't really like to spread out my subjects throughout the week, but I rather like to do one subject each day, if that makes sense, because it helps me to stay into my flow. I don't have to like shift my mind to go to another subject each time, which, you know, it's just very time consuming. We don't want that. For each study session, or like for each day where I plan to study for that subject, I try to read the book for the lecture, revise the lecture, summarize it, and sometimes I will do the practice task. Let's be honest, I do them very rarely, but I used to do that in first semester and second semester when I was very much motivated, but I don't. So yeah, that is basically my basic study routine, I would say. And I try to follow the syllabus with that. Sometimes I read the book for like next week, the chapter. Not really often though. I like to be on the same page as the lecture most of the time. I guess it's very self-explanatory, but just in case you guys were wondering, no, I don't study in advance. I'm not that motivated, okay? If you want to know how exactly I take my notes and how I do my summaries, I actually filmed a whole video about that, so I'll leave it linked up here somewhere. You can check that out, and it's also going to be linked in the description box. But basically, I make sure to understand the topic as much as possible already throughout the semester, because therefore I don't fear the topics as much. When it's like exam season, I know that I already understood the topic once. It kind of relieves a little bit of stress and anxiety from me, and that's what I want to do with my whole planning process, because that's why I plan. I know it's easier said than done, but I don't know what to tell you if you don't want to do your tasks. Watch any of my other videos where I talk about motivation and stuff. That's not the video for that, okay? And for this plan, I use my regular weekly planner. I used to use Google Calendars for that, but I'm gonna show you how I would do this in Notion, just because I don't really use Google Calendars anymore. But anyway, we're here in March. It's empty right now because I'm not studying anything. I already finished all my exams. Let's say that on Mondays I have my business valuation lecture, and therefore I would plan Mondays as my business valuation day. Okay, Tuesdays would be, I don't know, something else, taxation, and then so on and so on. This is just as a rough plan, and after like a few weeks into the semester, you already know, okay, Monday, this is the day that is reserved for business evaluation, and Tuesday, this is the day that's reserved for that subject. Okay, you don't have to write this down. This is just a rough plan, which kind of serves as a guidance. So this was what I do during the semester. Now let's go into detail into what I do during exam season, because that's when the actual study planning is happening. Okay, so when do I start studying for an exam? That really depends on the semester, and it depends on how many exams I have and how far they're spread out. I would say roughly I'll start around 2 or 3 weeks beforehand. Depends on you. You know your pace. Do what you want. Because my modules are divided into 2 parts, one is the lecture and one is the tutorial, I studied those separately as well. You can study chapter by chapter, but I find that for myself, I can retain information a lot better when I revise all the lectures and then I do all the practice task sets. But that depends on you. I'll write down all the lecture subjects, and then I'll write down practice task set, and then I'll assign them to a day 2 or 3 weeks before my actual exam. I would say roughly I plan around 2 to 3 lectures or practice task sets for each day. I think this is the amount that I can do in one day. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. It depends on the subject and it depends on the difficulty, obviously. And then depending on if there's a practice exam available or old exams, I will plan them into my study schedule as well. And then I will plan 1 to 3 days for memorization. This again depends on the subject. Obviously, if there's like more to memorize, then probably 3 days. If there's less to memorize, then probably 1 day. If there's nothing to memorize, then I plan 1 day at least or 2 days to write a cheat sheet. The reason why I like to do this after I studied everything else is because I really hate memorization, and I hate it with my whole heart to sit down and memorize stuff. When I already revised the lecture and I did the practice task, then I already retained a little bit of information with that. So therefore I have to memorize less later on. I mean, that's kind of obvious. And then after memorization, I usually have 1 buffer day before the exam. From my experience, I always end up using this buffer day somewhere in between. So I always just plan it just to have it there, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when you're going to feel unmotivated, unfocused. You never know when you're going to underestimate certain questions or certain topics. They might end up taking more time than you expected. And trust me when I say that I always end up using it, and that is kind of my study planning technique. Very easy and nothing special, but it's very effective for me. But we're not done yet. Okay, don't click off this video yet. So let me show you how I do this in Notion, or you can just use any other app. So as you can see, on the left hand side I have the dates, and then on the right hand side I have my 3 courses: econometrics, trade law, and private law. And here are all the tasks that I assigned to each specific date, the same way as I just explained it to you. But sometimes when some random things come up that I still need to do and I remember that, then I'll just write them down in here somewhere. Okay, so this is my study plan that I use. However, there's still another dimension to that, and this is the daily planning. Okay, let me explain that to you. There's a minimum requirement of tasks that I need to do each day in order to be on track with my study plan. Because of uncertainty of the future, you never know what's going to happen. Sometimes you end up not doing all the things in your study plan. If that happens, most of the time it stresses me out a lot, and then I have to like redesign my whole study plan. And in order to prevent that, I plan a little bit ahead of my study plan. I don't aim for the minimum requirement each day. I aim for a little bit higher than that, which is the minimum requirement plus 1 task from the day after. But this task should be pretty easy to do. The reason why I do this is because it gives me a little bit of time pressure, because again, I struggle with procrastination a lot, and by doing that I kind of think that I have more tasks to do than I actually have to do. Let's say on one day I plan to do 3 practice task sets. Now I would additionally put a 4th task, and then I would think, okay, I have 4 tasks to do, so I would be a little bit under pressure, because if I only had 3 tasks to do, I would think to myself that, oh no, I have like time to do this, and now I'm gonna do it later, and I end up procrastinating, and then I'll end up ditching something, and then my whole study plan gets ruined and I have to redesign everything again. I hope this kind of makes sense. I know I already planned a buffer day beforehand, but this buffer day is always going to be used for something else. It's not going to be used for my lazy ass procrastination struggles that I have, don't use your buffer day for that. Okay, don't think to yourself, that's okay, I didn't do this today, and you end up using your buffer day on the first day that you should be studying. Like, that's not supposed to be like that, okay? You know that. Then sometimes when I'm very stressed, I would block out time on my calendar. And then as for the to-do list, I usually have a table to kind of track my study process. I don't always use that, but I figured I'll just show you anyway. So here I have like a course template. I guess this is like for my HRM class, so please ignore that. But basically this is the table that I use. I have all the chapters written down here, and then the dates I want to do them. And then because the routine to each chapter is kind of similar, I put down these checkboxes here. And that's what I do. Sometimes, as you can see, I was not really consistent with it because it's sometimes a hassle to interrupt your flow and then go into your table and then cross off every single thing that you did. You don't have to do that. That's a little bit of like an extra step that you can take. Another thing that I do is to set weekly goals. I don't do this often, only for like longer term projects or when I want to plan far ahead in the future, which I don't think I ever did. So I only do this for like longer term projects, such as my thesis that I'm currently writing. This really helps me to stay on track and to kind of plan a little bit ahead, so I'm not getting stressed. And I would do this in my calendar, so I would just put weekly goal, and then when I'm in the week, I will assign specific tasks for each day in order to achieve this goal. As you can see, I'm not really that much of a planner. I always end up kind of ditching them if I plan too much and too detailed far ahead in the future. And then lastly, I want to share some simple tricks that I use in order to study for my exam better and more effectively. One thing that I like to do is I write down all my questions on a document. I'll write down my exact question, and no matter how dumb you think your question is, it's gonna be valid. Trust me. In German we would say, es gibt keine dummen Fragen, okay? Okay. Because later then you can discuss your questions with your friends or your peers, or you can even answer your questions yourselves, and therefore you kind of track your study progress. And sometimes, let me tell you, I read my questions and I'm like, what the heck was I thinking? Like, this is so easy. Why didn't I understand this? Trust me, that gives you like a very huge ego boost. I'm all about that. And then I also have a document where I write down things that I need to revise again. For example, certain topics or questions that I didn't understand. This is kind of like similar to the questions, but on my questions document, I really write down questions, and on this I would just write down, okay, chapter 2 or this topic and this topic, and I write them down on paper on my binder. I'm a person who studies better on paper, so I have all my study materials on binders. I always have these sticky notes on here, and I write the things that I need to revise on these sticky notes. So therefore I always have this on hand whenever I'm like doing something, revising my summary or doing the practice tests, that I can just easily write this down. The reason why I do this is because sometimes when I am studying a certain topic and I really don't understand it, and I tried my best to understand it, but I just can't, I get frustrated very easily, and rather than spending all my time and energy into trying to understand it, I just write it down and do it later with a clearer mindset. Maybe when I go back to this, I learned something different that helps me to understand this topic better. And sometimes, I have to admit, sometimes I just see a topic and I'm like, I don't really understand this, but I also don't want to understand it because otherwise it's gonna ruin my mood, and therefore I just write it down and do it later. Okay, but only do that in emergencies and only when you really hate the topic. Okay, and then another tip is to start with your easy tasks first. This kind of correlates with my basic principle, so you don't procrastinate on it. It's less intimidating to start. I think therefore you are more likely to start. And as I already mentioned, crossing off a task really boosts your mood from my experience. And then I would also recommend you to find study buddies. I know this is something that is very important, especially during a pandemic, because we're sitting in our rooms on our computers 24/7. We barely have any social interaction. At least here in Germany, all the libraries and cafes are closed, so I can't study anywhere else besides on my desk in my room. And that's what I've been doing for the past 6 months, and I'm slowly going crazy. But what kept me from very much going crazy is to have study buddies. I usually study with my friends on Discord, but if you don't have friends, that sounds kind of sad, but if they're not available or you really don't have friends, then you can always use study with me videos on YouTube. There's also study with me live streams, I think. I also have a few study with me videos on YouTube if you didn't already notice, so you can check them out if you want a little bit of self-promotion right there. Other than that, I think there's also like a website where you can find your online study buddy. I think it's just like studying with strangers, which I find pretty scary. You can do that if you like that. So this was it for all my tips and my study planning method. I hope that this was kind of helpful and I hope I explained it correctly, but I hope you kind of got like a feeling of what I do. Most of the stuff I do is in order to relieve my stress levels and my anxiety levels, because I tend to stress out very easily. If you found this helpful and you want to see more of those videos, let me know in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching up until this point. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a great day and I'll catch you in my next video. Bye! See you soon!
Was real. Can you tell me what you felt? 'Cause if